Welcome to Coffee with Dani V. I'm your host, V. This is Dani, your other host. We're here today to talk to you about menopause in the workplace. It's a conversation that we need to have because women who are in perimenopause and menopause make up the largest growing segment of the workforce. That's pretty critical. And 8 in 10 women who are in menopause are still in the workforce. So that's also very critical to realize. And it's an issue that is important, not just for us, women who are going through the transition, although it's pretty damn important for us, but it's important for employers to start to appreciate and understand and put in place some policies to support women who are going through this.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be really interesting because I think I'm going to approach this topic from the woman who's like knee deep in the experience. And you have some HR insights that I know I'm not going to have because just FYI, Danielle does the HR for MenoLabs and a whole host of other companies throughout her career. And so she's pretty well versed in what we could do to support women.
Yes.
So I'm excited to have this conversation. So first I'm going to throw out a few more statistics. This is fun for me. So $27 million in the United States gets lost to productivity, lost hours of productivity because of menopause symptoms.
That's a lot.
And here's the other thing. It's just vasomotor symptoms. So hot flashes, right? Yeah. It's not down to mood swings and brain fog and all of those other things that we know drastically impact women in menopause and your ability to function at work or feel like you can function at work, right? $27 million in lost productivity just for hot flashes. That's shocking. You wouldn't think that.
Yeah, you wouldn't. And so I think too, there's a lot around that number. So I think in so many ways, we're seeing how much menopause affects women in the workplace. But we're also, and I don't want it to be seen as like, okay, women in this age, because they're suffering from menopause, companies are losing money, right?
Right.
But it definitely opens your eyes to saying, okay, how can we help women that are going through this so that we're not having that loss of productivity and, in the workplace? Because, there's the person suffering through it and, they can feel that loss of productivity. It doesn't make them feel good. It makes them feel like they're not being successful in their job and in their position. They feel like everybody else can see that too, which, then turns into a lot of worry, anxiety, different things like that. But you also have it from the employer standpoint and, looking at, okay, maybe even a hiring decision.
Yeah, exactly.
So for me, this conversation around menopause in the workplace is so important for women to understand that there's ways for them to get control of their symptoms, to really, not have to suffer through this. And for employers to understand that there's ways that you can help facilitate women and help them, with what they need to kind of get through this, so there isn't that loss of productivity.
Well, and because women are in this age range are the fastest growing workforce segment, I think employers aren't going to have a choice in the matter, right? You're going to have to support this really critical piece of your workforce.
Right.
And here's the other thing: women who are, going through, the vast majority of women who have symptoms are, 45 to 54. Right. 3 in 4 women will have perimenopause and menopause symptoms. That's just a fact. 1 in 4 will have really serious, debilitating symptoms. But when you think about the amount of women who are still in the workforce, who are part of that growing segment, if you can't support them, you're losing your most critical employees, because those women who are 45, 54, guess where they are? Management level. They're moving into the C-suite, right? Yeah. They're making judgment calls and decisions, and if you can't support them when they need you, that says something about your business, and says something about how we look at women in their post-reproductive years in this society, right? As being marginalized and not important anymore, which is completely the opposite of what's actually happening in the workforce. Not just in terms of how many of us there are, but in terms of the level of responsibility that we have.
Yeah. And it's so important, I think, for women to not take a step back at that time.
Yes. So I was talking to a woman, just a little personal story here. She was telling me that she'd been feeling some symptoms for a while at work, and she was having a really difficult time, like, being honest about it. And she was kicking herself. She was like, okay, I'm 47. I feel like I have early onset dementia or Alzheimer's or something, because I can't keep it together. And this is not like me. I'm double booking appointments and important meetings. I'm getting lost even with GPS. I'm preparing for things and then I'm losing my train of thought. And this big, important presentation I was supposed to give at this huge conference should have been like a shining star on my resume, right, my CV. And it was a complete disaster because my brain fog was so bad that I just lost it. And it was so bad that her employer, even though, she's a pretty high level executive, her employer, her boss was like, we got to talk about this. It's an HR conversation because they felt she wasn't prepared. And it should have been an HR conversation around, hey, what's going on? Because this isn't typical.
Yeah. There was a new book out there by Oprah, and it's called What Happened to Me. And I think that this conversation for employers is similar to the conversation that Oprah was invoking with this book. It's not about what's wrong with you in that moment, but what's happening, you know, because you're identifying that this isn't the norm. And it's more about, hey, what's happening? How can I support you? Instead of, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you get it right today? You know, kind of a conversation. And I think that's the biggest thing for your leadership, your HR, to really dive into it from that perspective of, okay, what's going on? Not what's wrong with you, as if you were, I can't even think of the word.
Exactly. But I know what you mean.
Yeah.
As if you're somehow at fault.
Yes.
When it's really a physical response that your body is having to these changing hormones that, you can do something about, but until you know that you can do something about that, you feel completely at a loss.
Yeah. So I would say probably what most of you are wondering is, what do we do about it? And, from a personal standpoint, taking care of your health is one of them. Paying attention to the symptoms is one of them. Even tracking the symptoms so that you can kind of understand triggers. If certain things trigger brain fog, hot flashes, those kinds of things, if you're going into something that's very important from a meeting standpoint, being able to avoid those triggers, realizing that maybe de-stressing the night before with a glass of wine isn't the right move because tomorrow that's really going to trigger a hot flash, right?
Right.
So paying attention to those things, but you can't understand them or know what those triggers are a lot of times without tracking, so that you can really identify them.
And really understanding which symptoms are causing you issues at work, because then not all of them will, right?
No.
But for me, mood swings were a definite issue. Brain fog is still an issue. And for a lot of women, hot flashes are an issue. And I think if we can be honest about what's happening to it can be really embarrassing, right? You're having a hot flash and you're in a meeting. Can you imagine if you're the one giving the presentation and having a hot flash?
Yeah.
But I think I read a woman's story. I didn't talk to her personally, but I read her story online. And she said that she had been having difficulties with her menopause symptoms and impacting her ability at work. She was giving a presentation. She had a hot flash. And she just point blank said, you'll have to just give me a minute. I'm going to go to the restroom. I'm having a hot flash. She said she felt like it gave her control of the situation. And that after that presentation, which she got through just fine because she was willing to admit what was happening, take a moment for herself, and then come back and finish the presentation just fine. right? And then other people in the meeting came up to her afterward and said, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that hot flashes were a thing that would happen. You seem so young, right? and other women saying, oh my gosh, I've had the same thing. Men coming up and saying, my wife told me about this thing that happened to her. Thank you for saying something, because she felt like she couldn't, right? There was all this really positive energy. Yep. And education and sharing of personal experience that came out of it that bonded the team, and just made it a more normal conversation to have, which I think is what we have to get to.
Well, and I can see two things that she did there, and they're really important things. One is she was open. We have to stop being afraid to say anything. It's not, you're not going to lose your job because you said you're having a hot flash.
Right.
In fact, the second thing she did was she took control. And you have to take control. You have to be able to say, and from a leadership standpoint, from all angles, not only will leadership respect you more because you took control of it, you identified it, you pulled yourself from the situation and said, just give me a minute, so that you could collect yourself and be back on point when you came back to doing what you needed to get done. So they respect that, as opposed to falling apart, you know?
Right. Or trying to pretend like nothing is happening.
Yeah.
And not giving the presentation or whatever it is, the attention that it deserves.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I totally see that.
Yeah. So I really think that, you know, doing those two things, being open about what's going on with you, and that doesn't mean you have to go to TMI, you know. I think that there's a lot of misconstrued and nervousness around opening up because they feel that it's TMI. And I think that there's ways to do it, that if that's your concern, you have ways to open up without it feeling like you're just sharing the world about whatever's going on with you. But you also have to take control. You have to take control of the situation. You have to be okay. And part of that opening up and saying and taking control is maybe sometimes taking a step away. Or, you know what? Whip out a fan as you're sitting there talking, you know? Make it a beautiful one and own it. You know, I think that there's a couple different ways that, you know, if you really own it and you really take control of those situations, that you can really show that yes, you may be going through this, but you're still in control, right, of what's going on.
Yeah. And go to your HR department right away.
Yeah.
Right. If your concern about your ability to perform at work is because of your menopausal symptoms, go to your HR. Tell them this is what's happening. Do they have any resources for you to make use of? Is there an employee wellness program that they can recommend? You know, what can they help you do? And the more that you can be honest with them about identifying things, the more they'll realize, if they haven't already, and if you are in a leadership position, you absolutely should do this. Go to your HR and tell them that they need to make sure that their HR staff is educated around menopausal symptoms and issues and how to best support their employees. Yeah.
And that really is, you know, as the world is opening up to menopause and understanding more about menopause, and so is the workforce, right? So is, and it's definitely, you know, an up and coming trend where, you know, it was not something that was supported in, you know, 20, 30 years ago. And so we're definitely on this trend of paying attention to it and really, you know, being able to help women. And sometimes those HR departments, they just need that first step. They need to know that it's an issue so that they can move forward in that direction. It's not that they don't want to,
right?
You know, it's that they need to be able to understand that this is something that they need to help support their employees through.
You might need to educate your HR as well.
It's
kind of like, well, you know, we all had to fight for maternity leave, right?
Yeah.
And now when women are pregnant in the workforce, everybody wants to talk to them about their pregnancy and how are you doing and what can we do to support you, and let's go to your baby shower, right? I think we can get to the same kind of point.
We will. Menopause. I think we will. I really do. You know, pregnancy in the workplace has really been, from maternal leave to now paternal leave.
Exactly.
Is really welcomed now in a lot of workplaces. And I think that we're going to get to that same place. It might take a little bit of time. And I think, though, that what it really needs is for people to be open about it, and so that they realize that there's a need.
Yeah. So the first thing that you can do is identify if your menopausal symptoms are causing you to feel like you're less effective at your job. And if that's the case, talk to your doctor. Consider your diet. Start tracking your symptoms so that you know what's triggering them and how you can mitigate them. And then go to your HR, talk to your coworkers, take control of the situation, be open and honest. And I think that together we're going to move this conversation forward a whole lot faster. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.